I was standing in a line to get a ticket at an airplane counter once, and I spoke, and the lady in front of me turned around and said, "I know that voice. I've heard you on tape." No, I only say that to glorify the Lord, because the word He gave me has been proved true. And now again I'm on nationwide radio ministry, and I believe that's a further outworking of that calling. Faithful is He that calleth you, who also will do it. If I leave nothing else with you tonight, remember that. I've often said, if I had one message to leave to posterity, if I pass on before the Lord comes, I could say it in 3 words: God is faithful. Whenever I say that, tears come to my eyes. I don't cry for grief. The thing that brings tears to my eyes is the faithfulness of God. The second time God spoke to me, I was praying for a Danish lady named Lydia Christensen, who had a little children's home in a place named Ramallah, just north of Jerusalem. She was much older than I was. I visited the home once and been tremendously blessed in my spirit, and I saw that she lived on a very, shall I say, I don't want to use the word meager, but she certainly didn't have anything to spare of clothing, money, or anything else. I never believed Lydia lived in a meager way, because she always lived like a rich woman, even when she was desperately poor. So the word meager doesn't apply. Well, I thought, that's a beautiful work, and I'm going to pray for her. So one day when I was walking up and down between these lines of medical supplies, I thought, I'll pray for that Danish lady. So I started to pray, and the Spirit of the Lord came on me, and I spoke very powerfully in tongues. I knew God was trying to tell me something. Waited there, and there came these words: I have joined you together under the same yoke and in the same harness, the message of blessing and the hand of power. I thought, looks as though we're going to work together. And I was honestly so naive, that's all I thought. Next time I went to Jerusalem, I took the bus out to Ramallah, number 18 bus, and I introduced myself again to Lydia. I said, I think the Lord wants us to work together. It was a crazy thing to say, if you think about it. So her answer was most characteristic. Those of you who can remember her, she said, well, you'll have to work on both ends of the chain. Wasn't exactly a warm reception. Many of you here, the first time you met Lydia, you got a similar kind of response. I remember Brother Eric Krieger saying, I waited 2 years to meet Lydia, and the first time I did, she bawled me out. So, then let me tell you something else that happened. I knew the Lord had called me to Palestine. I knew He wanted me in Jerusalem, and there were 3 Pentecostal missions in or around Jerusalem. One was the Little Children's Home, one was American Assemblies of God, one was American Independent. Now, there was another soldier with me at that time in the hospital who had a beautiful gift of prophecy. So one day I went to him and I said, Frank, I know the Lord wants me to be released from the army in this country. I know He wants me to work here. I can't see working on my own. I think I ought to get joined to one of these Pentecostal missions. Would you help me and pray that I'll make the right choice? Well, Frank was very close with one of the Pentecostal missions, and he had no doubt whatever that that's the one I should work with. But he dutifully prayed for all 3, and last of all he came to this little children's home, which was the most unlikely place for me to be associated with. And as he started to pray, he said this. He said, Lord, you've shown me that home will be like a little stream. The stream will become a river. The river will become a great river. The great river will become a sea, and the sea will become a mighty ocean. And when we got up from praying, I said, thank you, brother, I know what to do. You know how I knew? Because the first time the Lord ever spoke to me by tongues and interpretation, that was what He said to me. It shall be like a little stream. The stream shall become a river. The river shall become a great river. The great river shall become a sea. The sea shall become a mighty ocean. Could you believe that God had spoken that to that young soldier, to me about my life and ministry, and given him exactly the same words, detail for detail, comma for comma, that he'd given me. So he never knew how I knew. I never told him. Well then, Lydia and I got married, and I'd have to say this: if I were any sane marriage counselor, and I had come to me for counsel, I would have turned thumbs down on that marriage. There was no way it could work. Lydia was from a different culture. She was Danish. She was much older than I was. She was a very strong character. She'd established her own mission work, and she had 8 girls, the oldest of whom at that time would have been about 17, that went along with her. So anyone that married her got 8 girls for free. I mean, there was just no way such a marriage could work. But we got married. We got married because it was the will of God. After we were married, I remembered what the Lord had spoken to me. And I remembered that He'd said, I've joined you together under the same yoke and in the same harness. And I knew enough scripture then to know that the yoke was marriage. The harness was working together in the Lord's service. Now, we were married in 1946. Lydia died just less than 30 years later. And for 30 years, we were under the same yoke and in the same harness. And many of you here knew us both. We had our problems. Lydia was not always an easy person to live with, nor was I. But it worked. And one of the things that people would say to us is, when you two minister together, you're just like one person. See, what's the purpose of marriage? The two shall become one. I think the other great source of our strength was our unity in prayer. Most days, we began and ended the day by praying together. And many, many times, God also spoke to us. Normally, Lydia would get the tongue, I would get the interpretation. Looking back, I cannot recall a single instance in which it did not work out the way God said it would. But one of the things that's so real to me is the power of two agreeing in prayer. Jesus said, if two of you shall agree, you can ask what you will. It'll be done for you. There were times when Lydia and I touched God in harmony, and I knew whatever we asked for would be done. We met opposition, sometimes from fellow Christians. And you know, honestly, I felt sorry for them. Because I just knew they couldn't stand up against the power of our prayer. And no one ever did. I don't say that boastfully, but it's an actual fact. Well, let me say something else. God said He would give us the message of blessing and the hand of power. Lydia always had a special power in praying for the sick and those who needed deliverance, long before we really came into the ministry of deliverance. But when we were in Minneapolis in 1963, one day, the Lord placed the gift of healing in Lydia's hand. A very specific transaction that took place. And after that, she prayed for scores and scores of people who were instantly healed when that gift came into operation. And one of the strange things that happened was she would get a kind of explosion when the gift came. I mean, she would just roar out in tongues. And she said, you know, it embarrasses me. I don't want to do it, but I just can't help it. And if I don't do it, the gift doesn't come. Well, now I want to tell you this, and I hope you can receive this, because God's got ways of doing things that don't always fit our theological ideas. But when Lydia died, she bequeathed that gift to me. And I've discovered since I can do it. I never did it while she was here, but the gift was too important for God to let it just languish. And since then, there have been times in my life when I've known that I could minister that healing gift. And the same type of explosion has come. And I realize how embarrassing it is. I always try to be quiet about it, but it just doesn't work. All right. Then the Lord called Lydia home. And I don't purpose tonight to talk about how to deal with bereavement. But I want to tell you that it's the thing that Christians need to learn to face. When Lydia left me, it was like something torn out of my inside. There's no way to express the agony I felt. And yet, you have to realize if you want the good, you've got to take what goes with it. The more you love a person, the more you'll miss them when they go. And I have prepared a series of messages on death, which will be coming out on the radio. I find that the majority of Christians are not really ready to handle bereavement. And I think God put me through a school. I don't want to speak about it, but let me say one thing. Within an hour of her death, I did one thing which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I said, Lord, I release her to you. I'm not asking for her back. And when I made that release, I think it enabled God to begin the process of healing. I also remember the words of Job. When all his children were taken from him, he said, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. I always used to view that as kind of resignation. What can I do about it? But in that experience, I saw that that was faith. And friends, I want to ask you this. If you can trust the Lord to give, can you trust Him to take? Because you're not really trusting Him if you only trust Him to give. It's got to be a double trust. Then I told the Lord that I was willing to live single if I could serve Him better that way. And I was perfectly sincere, and after about being single for about 2 years or so, I really concluded that was it. Then I went with a very interesting and wonderful group of brothers back to Israel in 1977. I remember David and Tony Rose were with us, and I decided that I would stay an extra week in Israel to seek out God's will for my future. And in particular, if it was time for me to turn my face again toward Israel, because I knew that my call to that land and that people was not finished. So I spent an extra week. In the course of that week, I went to visit a mission that has distributed my literature in Israel, in Hebrew and many other languages, and in Arabic. I thought I owed them the courtesy to go. And I'd received a letter from the brother in charge of the mission, and at the bottom his secretary had added a little note in handwriting, your ministry means so much to me. So I thought, well, when I go to the office, I'll do the courtesy of seeing this lady that signed this letter and expressing my appreciation. Because I really do try, you may not believe me, but I try to show I'm grateful to the people that show me any kind of kindness. I never want to lose a friend unnecessarily. Well, when I got to the headquarters, they said the lady has injured her back and she's lying in bed in her apartment and she's not here in the office. Well, I looked at David Rose and I thought to myself, if there's one thing I am successful for, it's praying for people with injured backs. I thought I really would be very, it'd be very ungracious of me not to offer to pray for her. So I said, well, if you like, I said, David, you and I'll go and pray for her. So they told us the address, and David and I got lost in Jerusalem. He was driving a van. I said, David, let's give up. Probably God doesn't want us here. And right at that moment, we were outside the place. So we went in, and there's this lady lying on a couch or sitting in a chair, forget which. And I thought, let's keep this short. If there's one thing I really don't like, is visiting the sick. I mean, I know it's a Christian duty, but I just don't like doing it, that's all. God bless the people that do it. I mean that. So I said, anybody check your legs? She said, yes, you did. I said, when was that? She said, when you were in Washington, D.C. in 1971. Well, I said, I don't remember that. Let me try again. Well, they were absolutely even. So I said, well, I did a good job. That's one thing. So then David and I prayed, And we really felt that God had done something. Now, let me give her testimony for a moment. She'd had a spinal curvature for many, many years, probably from childhood. Today, she has a perfectly straight spine. She also had at that time a ruptured disc. And although that was not healed at that time, it has been healed since. To God be the glory. Well, we got to the last night of my last day in Israel, and I went to bed at 11 o'clock at night, and I had the most unusual night of my life. Because I got up at 6 a.m., I had not slept one wink. I hadn't even got sleepy. And all that night, the Lord was dealing with me about His purposes for my life, His calling, the promises that He'd given me. And He said very clearly to me, every promise I've ever given you will be fulfilled if you believe and obey me. And then I had a vision. Now, I don't get many visions. And in this vision, I saw the road back to Jerusalem. It was like going up to the old city at the southwest corner, those of you that know Jerusalem. It was a kind of zigzag road. And it led into Jerusalem and the place where God wanted me to be. But right at the beginning of the road, there was this woman sitting in a green dress, if I remember rightly. And I knew who the woman was. It was the lady that I visited to pray for. And God made it clear to me that the first step in my return to Jerusalem was to marry that woman. Well, I don't know what you think my reaction was, but I'll tell you, I was upset. Probably I was very carnal, but I thought, oh, Lord, I don't love the woman. Are you asking me to marry somebody I don't love? And I thought, I'm not going to do anything about this. I'm going to say nothing to anybody for at least 1 month. I'm just going to pray. Well, I prayed, and the more I prayed, the more convinced I was that this was the will of God. So then I thought, well, I better do something about it. So I wrote a letter to the lady, and I said, if you're coming to the United States, it would be nice for you to visit David Rose's fellowship in Kansas City. They're so interested in Israel and the Jewish people. And she received the letter about 3 days before she was planning her trip to the United States, about which I knew nothing. So we met in Kansas City. She had her daughter with her, who's here tonight. And I don't know whether they noticed anything, but I looked at them both. I scrutinized them. And I thought to myself, you know, is this for real? And then the Lord opened the way for us to spend some time together in David Rose's home. And one evening, just before we were going to have a meeting, the lady who's here tonight, Ruth, came to my room and said, I want to speak to you. I need your counsel. And because she still had this ruptured disc, she didn't like sitting in a chair. So she sat on the floor and leaned against the wall. And as she sat there, I saw her in exactly the position that God had showed me in the vision. And as she began to talk to me, an overwhelming love for her came over me. I mean, it was like electricity. And I was sorely tempted to tell her everything. But I thought, no, I might scare her. Besides, I'm a well-known charismatic preacher, and I need to get some more counsel before I go in for all this. So, it transpired that she was going back. And really, I don't know where to leave things out in this. She was going back to Israel. I was going to South Africa shortly. And I'd planned to make a stopover on the way back to this continent in Jerusalem just for a rest. So I said, I'm going to be in Jerusalem for Yom Kippur. That's the Day of Atonement, the most sacred day in the Jewish calendar. So I said, maybe I could meet you in Jerusalem. Now, she could tell her side of the story, but the Lord was speaking to her. And without my saying anything to her, He showed her that he wanted her to marry me. And her reaction, too, was not altogether enthusiastic at first. I say that because, brother or sister, if anybody comes and says, the Lord has shown me I'm to marry you, you better answer, well, he hasn't shown me yet. And don't you be stampeded by somebody else's revelation. So, while I was in South Africa, I thought, well, I've always wanted to buy a South African diamond. The last church I preached in, one of the members of the church owned the ritziest jewelry store in Pretoria, which is the capital city. In fact, the Prime Minister of South Africa and others were his customers. So I said, I've always wanted to buy a diamond. So I'll take you to my store, I'll explain them all to you, and I'll give you a good deal. So I bought a diamond. And I knew what I was buying it for. I just knew that I was buying it to put on Ruth's finger. But the thing was that the Holy Spirit was pressuring me to buy that diamond. Those of you that know me, know I'm not really a very covetous person, and I don't run out to all the stores and shop. Then the man showed me another stone, a tiger's eye, which is something that's found mainly in South Africa, and very nicely set in gold. I said, I'll take that too. Then I sent a cable to Ruth, and I said, meet me in the King David Hotel at 9 a.m. the day before the Day of Atonement. So there I am in the King David Hotel lobby at 8:45, believe me, sitting there wondering, will she or won't she? And at 9:03, I would say, in she walks through the door. And I thought, this is it. What's going to happen next? So we had breakfast together, which has become a custom of ours. I didn't mean it that way, but anyhow. And I thought, what do I do now? I'm really a tremendously naive person when you get to know me. So I said, I brought you a souvenir. Which was this tiger's eye, a really quite expensive piece of jewelry. Just a $15 item. So then, I thought I'd better find out about her. I don't know the first thing about her. So I got her to tell me her life story. Then we decided that we would go to the synagogue for the eve of Yom Kippur ceremony, which is the most sacred, solemn ceremony Jewish. So we went to the main synagogue on King George Avenue, and the man who was in charge, what you'd call the janitor, whatever you like to call him, said, no tickets left. You have to get tickets, you understand. Well, I said, I'm a visitor from the United States, and this is rather special for me. So he said, well, they'll cost you $15 each. So I said, okay, give me 2 tickets. So he wrote in Hebrew, Mr. Prince and Mrs. Prince. So as I handed Ruth's ticket to her, I said, I'm sorry, but you'll have to go as Mrs. Prince. I couldn't explain to the man that it's different. My Hebrew was only just equal to getting the tickets, let alone explaining anything else. But again, I said to myself, the Jewish people are a prophetic people. That's God that put that name on that ticket. So, sometime in the course of the next 24 hours, I told Ruth what the Lord had shown me about her. I thought, you either do it or you don't do it. You either believe it's from God. I'm just not one to date. I can't bother with all these niceties and formalities. It either works or it doesn't. And all I have to say is it worked. And so I ended up by being deeply in love with the lady in the course of about 48 hours. And most of you would agree I'm a fairly emotionally stable person. Well, then, a lot of things had to happen. I don't want to go into this in detail, but I felt I owed it to my committed brothers not to marry without their approval. I realized that I wasn't a private individual, I was a figure in the charismatic movement. If I did something wrong at this stage in my life and ministry, it could overthrow the faith of thousands of people who looked to me as a kind of leader and figure. So we had a meeting, and I told them everything, and they got glummer and glummer, and less believing. And when it came to the vision, I could see it wasn't getting through to them. Now, it sounds comical now, but it didn't then. And only one of them had met Ruth for a couple of hours. Otherwise, they didn't know her, and she was a rather strange person. She was a convert to Judaism who lived in Jerusalem, and, you know. And frankly, I have to say, looking back, none of my brothers thought that, I don't think they would have thought any woman was good enough to marry me when I think back. So, we had a very, I would say, intense meeting, and they said, we're asking you not to do it. Now, I don't know how you would respond to that, but unfortunately, I had written a book called The Grace of Yielding. And every time I wanted to argue, God said to me, you wrote the book, are you going to do what it says or not? And I tell you, many, many times I wished I never wrote that book. So I said, all right, you say no, I'll agree. All I ask is you put it in a letter that I can take to Ruth and explain your decision, and I'll communicate it to her, and we'll break off relationship. It so happened that I had the privilege of going to Jerusalem again for a few days just before Sadat came for the first time. So I delivered the message, and we said goodbye and broke it off. Now, I believe that was in the will of God. Looking back, I do not believe our relationship could ever have been what it is today if we hadn't been willing to make that submission. I tell you, it's one thing to preach submission, it's another thing to practice it. Well, after that, I had a commitment to go to New Zealand and Australia for about 6 weeks over Christmas and New Year. And I realized the Lord was getting me away from everything and everybody so that I could pray. And while I was in the jet plane flying west across the Pacific Ocean, the Lord gave me a scripture. It's in Psalm 61, verse 2. From the end of the earth will I cry unto thee when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Do you know what impressed me? The psalmist that wrote that never went anywhere near the end of the earth. How could he write it? And there I was, literally on my way to the end of the earth. And if you want to know, the east coast of New Zealand is the furthest inhabited place on the surface of the globe from Jerusalem. But God said, that's what you're going to the end of the earth for, to pray. And I tell you, I prayed. There's a kind of desperation that God waits to achieve in us. Do you know that? You understand what I'm saying? It's one thing to say a prayer. It's another thing to be a prayer. I became my own prayer. And 1 week in Australia, I ended up in a little Pentecostal pastor's home. And they gave me a little room, and they were very kind, but they didn't press themselves on me. And I spent hours every day that week in prayer in that room. And I want to tell you, I prayed through. When I came back out of there, I knew that Ruth was to be my wife. I didn't fear. I didn't doubt. And God gave me a very beautiful little saying. What dies in the fall will be resurrected in the spring. Wasn't that beautiful? I'd given her up in the fall, and in the spring it was resurrected. I want to just say something to you. Almost everything that God gives us has to go through a death and a resurrection. You know that? And I said, God, why? And He gave me this answer. Because when I resurrect a thing, I can resurrect it the way I want it. And I really believe God gave me a new depth of relationship with Him. He also said something to me very beautiful, which I'm going to say could expose me to criticism. But I want you to learn the lessons. He said very simply, because thou hast humbled thyself, I can entrust thee with honor. And actually, in my spirit, I know that God is going to entrust me with a new measure of honor. And I just say that because I want you to understand there's a price to pay. The book of Proverbs says, before honor is humility. And I've been through this. As far as I'm concerned, it's as settled as if it was written in the sky. I know what God is going to do within certain areas. I don't believe I'll ever have to go through that particular experience again. And I bless God for every part of it, looking back. Well, back in Jerusalem by divine appointment, and I think I should tell you that the Lord gave Ruth this, I will deliver him to you and pay the postage. And every time, I went to Jerusalem 3 times in the next few months, and every time my fare was paid. I don't need to go into the details. Well, then when I got in contact with my brothers again, the Lord had changed their hearts. And I would have to say they have welcomed Ruth, both them and their wives, with love and acceptance. I'd have to say that if I had given God a blueprint or a job description of the type of woman I needed to marry, it would have been Ruth. I mean, I took her in faith. I'd have to say that. Well, I'm glad I did. She took me in faith, too. I mean, who would think that I was marrying a former sergeant from the U.S. Marines? I didn't know I was getting that. Then one day we were sitting in the Mercedes and she said, you know, I took a course in tractor maintenance. I mean to say. No, seriously, she has every skill and ability that I need to supplement my ministry. And in the matter of writing, she's the very person I'd been needing for years. Every time I got somebody who could help me, they got promoted, which was all right. But I'm not letting my wife get promoted. That's one person I can hold on to. And I just glanced at God's dealings, and I think the first time the Lord gave me a woman from a Scandinavian background, fair hair and blue eyes, and I met her in Jerusalem. The second time I met her in Jerusalem, she's by Norwegian by background, she has fair hair and blue eyes. And both Lydia and Ruth shared the most important thing in my life, a total commitment to Israel. Any woman that was not totally committed to Israel could not be my wife. And so, way back, I think in April of this past year, one day together, we solemnly dedicated ourselves to God and to each other, for Jerusalem, for Israel, for God's people everywhere. And there are things that one does in life that one knows will stand no matter if the world folds up. And that's one of them. God has plunged me into a new intensity and development of my ministry that I simply could not handle, even physically, if I didn't have the skilled assistance of Ruth. The radio ministry, the way it has exploded, the demands it has made on me, I simply could never have handled if I hadn't had that loyal, committed, skilled assistance that I didn't even ask for. God provided it. Now, I particularly want to speak next week take myself and visions and revelations out of it and come down to the basics. I don't want anyone to leave here tonight imagining that you can't get married unless you get a vision. But on the other hand, I'm going to give teaching on what I believe are the basics of making the right choice of a partner.